So the heart of the gospel is God's heart and his motive of why he gave his son's life for you. We need to begin to look in our hearts, because what a God is who you rely on, who you trust in. Sudden disaster happens. Suddenly your world's turned upside down. What's your first instinct to do? Where do you turn first? Because that's most likely where your trust is. You shall have no other gods before me. What is a God in our life? What does a God perform? They're the source of our provision. That's why they worshiped the gods of fertility. They worshiped the gods of harvest, because they were hoping, they were trusting that if I worship whatever that God is, that God's going to make sure we have a good harvest this year. I'm going to worship the God of fertility because we can't have children, and if I have this image of this God of fertility, that means that somehow that God's going to help us to have children. So he was looking to man-made gods to provide a need in my life, and putting my trust and confidence in that God. And whatever you put your trust and confidence in, you begin to open your heart up to and allow in your heart. Now, it's interesting, because in going through this, just kind of reviewing this morning, what I suddenly realized is all the rest of these commandments are instructions so that we don't do that. Because ultimately, what this is about, when we have another God other than God as the God in our life, we've chosen really to be our own God, to make our own way. So as you go on down, he talks about a graven image. A graven image is forming something that I'm going to begin to worship in, not that image itself, but what's behind that image, what that image represents. But then when he goes down and says, you shall not steal, what's stealing? It's taking something that I want for myself because I don't trust God's going to provide it for me. When I lie, what is that? Because I don't trust that if I tell the truth, God's going to somehow bring me out of this situation. So I've got to take the issue into my hands and restructure the truth so that I can protect myself. Coveting, it's obviously that. Covet another man's wife, covet somebody's car. I want that myself. And coveting is something with the heart. All of these are something in the heart. It's giving our hearts over to something else to be our source, and I'm in control of that. That's the issue here. This is not just outward things. This is a heart issue. This is a foundation issue. This is the foundation of our life issue. And we need to be willing to look at these things. And what he's reminding them is, I'm the one that delivered you out of bondage. Pharaoh didn't deliver you. You didn't deliver yourself. And because of these things, you shall have no other God before me. In other words, God is saying, and remember, he's talking, God's speaking in his voice to Moses and the people from this mountain. And God is saying, I demand that I am before any other God in your life. I demand that. So that's pretty pushy of him. He's God. The end of Isaiah, I think it's 60, it says that the fear of the Lord means that we tremble at his word. I don't mean we run away from God, because what happened is the children of Israel became afraid of God and ran away from him. Moses drew closer to him. He must be before any other God. Before in time, and this is the things we're going to begin to talk about. Before in importance in your life, or in any capacity. Everything else in God's divine order is based on this foundation. Because he has an order. He has an order for your family. He has an order for your finances. He has an order for everything in your life. And see, we can have this attitude, well, that's kind of pushy for God to think he's got the right to come in and order my life. Remember, go back to the first verse. I am the Lord your God. And see, it bucks up against our flesh. And that's what needs to be challenged. Because either God's supreme in my life or I think I am. And if you think you are, then you're deceived because it's the devil that is. Because neither you and I are not capable of being gods. So if we think we're our self-made man, if we think I'm in control of my life, then you're deceived because that tells you that really Satan's the one that's in control of your life. I'm not talking about whether you're going to heaven or not. I'm talking about what God's able to do in your life. God's blessings in your life. God's prospering your life. And I'm not talking about money, because there's prosperity that's far beyond money. It's having a happy marriage. It's having children that call you blessed and rise up and call you blessed. It's having health in your body. It's having joy in your life. There are blessings that are far beyond money, and the money will come in, but if that's what you think is the blessing, then that's your God. If money is the source of your happiness, that's your God. If your job and your accomplishments in your job are your source of your happiness and fulfillment, then that's a God in your life. And we'll look at some of those things. But God has an order for your family. God has an order for your own time, for your own life. He has an order for your finances. And the foundation of it all has to be, He has to be first. He has to be number one in priority in time, priority in the investment of your heart. The rest of these commandments deal with violations of the first, our own effort to be our own God. Now let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 8, and I want to show you why. Now, Exodus is where God, oh, by the way, while you're going there, let me just tell you how this story plays out. Because, again, this is a good example of what we're talking about. God tells Moses, I want to get them over to this land. Remember, He wants to get them there to bless them. He wants to get them there to prosper them so that they can have a place that flows with milk and honey. So He comes down on the mountain to appear before them in a limited form. God's never appeared before anybody in this full form. And this form He chooses is a form of thunder and lightning and the ground shake. It's to share with them a little bit of His awesome power to back up who He said He is. And He called them to come out, it says, so that they would see Him, fear Him, and obey Him. Because God knew that they needed to have a reverence for Him before they would obey Him. And what do? They come out to the bottom of the mountain, and they hear the rumblings, and they see the fire, and they say to Moses, this is too much for us. This is their answer for what they need. Now listen carefully. God has said, I know how to get you to the place of blessing. And they're saying, no. We can't handle that. That's too much for us. We know what we need. So Moses, you go listen to Him, and then you come tell us, because we're going to be back in our tents watching the football game. You come tell us what we need, and then we'll go do it. See, they had confidence in their own self that they would do, that they would obey God. They had confidence in themselves. This is good. They had confidence in their own intentions. They had confidence in their own intentions. We've seen Him now. If we just hear the words, Moses, from you, that we'll obey Him. And I believe with all my heart they were sincere, but they were wrong. Because the very thing they did, the first thing they do, is they start out disobeying Him. See, God knows what we need to get us there. But they wouldn't trust Him. They trusted themselves. And the result is, the short story is that they never made it. That generation never made it into the place God had prepared for them. He had to keep them wandering around another 39 years in the wilderness until that generation died off and the next generation born in the wilderness, that generation He now brings in. Now, Deuteronomy, we're now 39 years down the road. That generation's first generation's died off. The generation that was born in the wilderness is now ready to enter the promised land. They're right on the doorway, and now God begins to speak through Moses, going back over, rehearsing what they've just come through. So God's method often is He'll teach you something, then later on He'll take you on a review of what you learned. So this is going back over why He's done what He's done with them. And we're going to go down through most of this chapter. Chapter 8, verse 1. Every commandment I command you today, you must be careful to observe, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land of which the Lord swore to your fathers. And you shall remember the Lord your God, who led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness. Look what he led you to do. To humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you and allowed you to go to hunger. Now look at what that means. He fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you to know something. Now stop there. So God is telling them this is why, because in the story, I'm sure most of you remember, is that they got out of the wilderness and they're complaining they've run out of their food. And God says to Moses, here's what you're going to do. They're going to get up every morning and they're going to come out, and when the dew is fallen on the ground, what they're going to see is what's fallen with them is a substance that they can now take and they can knead it into dough and they can bake bread. And they went out and looked at it and they said, what is this stuff? Which is literally what manna means in Hebrew. What is this? So God gave them something they didn't know, something they didn't have experience with. And his instructions were, you're to go out every morning and to gather, listen carefully, just that day's bread. If you try to collect 2 days' worth, the second day is going to rot. The exception is when you do it on the 6th day, that day you can take 2 days, because he's also prescribed a Sabbath day of rest where they can't go out and collect anything. So that does two things. It allows them to have bread on the Sabbath, but it shows them that God could have made that bread extend for 2 days if he wanted to. The fact that it rotted is because God said, I've only told you to collect 1 day's worth. And of course, what do they do the first time? The first day, what do? They go out and collect as much as they can. They're still not trusting. And it rots. Now he's explaining to them, this is why I did that. So when God says I'm hungering them, he's not starving them, he's disciplining them. Because he's training them in something that is far more important than how much bread they get to eat. And here's the reason. So I humbled you, verse 3, and allowed you to be hungry, and I fed you with manna which you did not know. That's what that means. Nor did your fathers know, that he, God, might make you to know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. He said, I'm just teaching you that you need to live on my word more than you live on the bread you can collect. God's saying, I am your source. I want you to learn to trust my word, that when I tell you I will provide for you, I will provide for you. Even in a wilderness where there's no Shaw's, there's no Stop and Shop, there's no 7-Eleven, I will provide for you no matter where you are, because I want you to learn to trust my word more than you trust that bread you collect. I'm teaching you something so that when you get into that land, I can bless you. Goes on to say, verse 4, your garments didn't wear out on you, nor would your feet swell these 40. They're walking in the most hostile place they could walk in. Horrible heat in the middle of the daytime. Rock, it's all rock. It's a source of all rocks. Rocks, heat. In the nighttime, it's cold, it's freezing. And God says, for 40 years, your clothes didn't wear out. Your shoes didn't wear out. Your garments didn't get holes in them. God provided food, clothing for them supernaturally every day for 40 years. Verse 5, you should know in your heart that as a man chastens or train, that word means his son, so the Lord God trains or chastens you. Therefore you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God to walk in his ways and to fear the Lord. Here, this is where for the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks, of water, of fountains and springs that flow out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive oil and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land where stones are iron out of those hills and you can dig copper. When you have eaten and are full, this is why, so that when you have eaten and are full, then you will bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments. Oh, let's stop there a second. He's saying the key to remembering God is to keep his commandments. If you start forgetting his commandments, you'll start forgetting him. Not just who he is, but who he really is to you. So how we keep the commandments is a reflection on how we see God. So I thought we've been redeemed from the commandments. I thought we're not under the law, but we're under grace. No, Jesus said, I've come not to throw the law out, but to fulfill it, to enable you to fulfill it, and cover you when you slip and fail. So the law is not thrown out. Verse 12. Lest when you've eaten and are full and have beautiful houses and are dwell in them, when your herds and your flocks multiply and your silver and gold are multiplied. Doesn't that sound good? I mean, God's not trying to skimp on them. He wants to bless them. He says, but here's the point. When I bless you, I'm training you so that when I bless you, you won't forget me. Verse 14. And when your heart is lifted up and you forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness in which fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty land where there was no water, who brought water for you out of a flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna which your fathers didn't know, that he might humble you and might test you to do good to you. And then you say in your heart, but my power and my might of my hand has gained me this wealth. Instead, you shall remember your Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant with you, which he swore to your fathers to this day. God wanted to establish with them from the very beginning who he was to them, so that he could bless them, prosper them, take care of them. Because he said, if you don't have this foundation, that I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. If you don't see me as the source of everything in your life, then when those blessings begin to come, they're going to pull your heart away from me. God wants to bless you, take care of you, pour his blessings in you and through you. But when he's not the foundation of our life, he knows those blessings will eventually pull you away from him, and he's a jealous God. He loves you so much, he doesn't want anything that'll take you away from him. He sent his son to die to save you out of Satan's grasp, because Satan was going to take you away from him. He was willing to send his own son to shed his blood to rescue you from the one who would take you away from him. Everything else he does in your life is to keep you from, to help you to not pull away from him. Hebrews chapter 12 relates back to this. Once you start in verse 5, which is a recitation of Proverbs 3, part of Proverbs 3, talks about because God is a loving Father, he will correct us. And having gone down through all of that, we're going to pick up in verse 25. See therefore that you do not refuse him who speaks. For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, what he's talking about is what we just looked at. He's referring now that when he came down on that mountain to Israel and tried to teach them and to try to tell them what they had to base their life on, they didn't listen to him. That's what he's referring to here. For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth. That's what we just looked at. But now is promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. Not where he lives, but that spiritual atmosphere around this earth. Now this once more indicates the removal of those things, look at it carefully, the removal of those things which are being shaken. Remember, we started out with that simple story Jesus told about the two men that build their houses. One house could be shaken and destroyed. The other house could not be shaken and destroyed. And the difference is what the houses were built on, what the foundation of their lives were built on. And that's exactly what the Spirit of God is talking about here. Yet once more indicates the removal of those things which can be shaken, verse 27, as of things which are made. Things that are made by our hands. That the things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace, or hold on to grace, by which we may serve a God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. What he's saying is there's going to come a time when everything that this world, that man has made, the systems of this world, the foundations of this world, and I don't mean literally, although eventually that too, everything that man has learned to trust, his economy and everything, is going to be shaken. And the only things that will remain are the things that are of God. And so the question is, what's the foundation of my life? If I want to be standing strong in the midst of those trials, I have to have God first as the foundation in every area of my life. I have to have God first as the foundation in every area of my life. We may or may not get into this issue when we talk about finances, but I'll give you a little clue. The book of Revelations, it talks about when the Antichrist has taken over. And it says that be careful that you don't receive the mark of the beast on your forehead or on your hand, because what's necessary to use to buy and sell. I mean, 50 years ago, what can that mean? Nowadays, you can see exactly what it means. You can see what we're headed towards, a system whereby it says, look, everything's with credit card. I mean, you get in other parts of the world, it's all credit. There's no cash. And the only thing secure is going to be credit cards, and then, well, you could lose a credit card, but they can now implant chips in animals. They can implant chips, and they can implant a chip in your hand or your forehead that's used to scan, and it says that's necessary to buy and sell. Because what we're going to look at is the world's economy system is based on the functioning of buying and selling. I need what you have, so I got to provide something that you want that I have, that I can have what you want. So it's based on what can I get. And of course, we know that when sales are out there, ladies, you get excited because you get a bargain. So you get more than you paid for. So the very essence, and I didn't plan to get into this morning, the very essence of buying and selling is you want the best deal you can get. So it's selfish-oriented. I want to get a better deal than you get. God's kingdom isn't based on buying and selling. It's based on sowing and reaping. Because in buying and selling, you're in control, or the one you're buying from is in control. In God's kingdom, God provides for us on the basis of our sowing and reaping. God is our source, whether you have a job or not. God is our source, whether the stock market drops 500 points in a day or not. God is our source, no matter what happens, because nothing can shake God and his economy. So the question we're going to look at is, what are you building your finances on? Which kingdom are you operating in your finances? I'm not saying it's wrong to use credit cards. I'm not saying it's wrong to buy and sell, but what's your trust in? Are you developing your faith that what you sow, God will reap back to you? Are you developing your faith that God is your source? Because we better begin to do that now if you haven't. Because I don't know when this is going to happen. We may not be here, but I want to be prepared, and I have a responsibility to prepare you. So that's just a preview for when we talk about finances, but it applies to every area of our life. Am I trusting in God? Let's go now quickly. We'll end here. Let's go to Matthew 22. Verse 34. Jesus has just said some things to them about the Scriptures and who he is. But when the Pharisees heard that he'd silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. Then one of them, a lawyer, I don't know why they keep picking on lawyers, asked him a question, testing him, saying, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." Now let's stop there a second. I learned something this morning as I was researching this. This was called by the Jews the Shema, S-H-E-M-A, because it's a reference to what they did, which is really in Deuteronomy 6, verse 4, where they they would say, which Deuteronomy 6:4 says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." And they were to recite that every morning when they got up. And some authorities I looked at said they were to recite that twice a day. Shema is the Hebrew word for hear. So the emphasis is hear. The Lord your God is one. He's not 1,000 different gods. He is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all. So Jesus is quoting something that they knew. He's not teaching them a new principle. He's quoting something that they were supposed to have been saying twice a day for their whole life. But he goes on, and this is why we want to look at that. You shall love the Lord your God, verse 37, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. He adds mind to it. Why? Because to the Hebrews, the heart was the center of your being. But to the Greeks, the mind was the center of your being. So Jesus is saying, with all of you, whether it's your heart or your mind or your soul, you are to love the Lord your God with all of that.